This podcast is certified fresh. Freshmediaworks.com.
Looking to boost your company's marketing? Look no further than Fresh MediaWorks. Podcasting is the best way to promote your brand and increase your customer base. You can create your own show, be a guest on other podcasts, or advertise on existing podcasts to reach a valuable audience. Don't wait. Start elevating your marketing game today with Fresh MediaWorks. Call now, 713-269-4620, or find us online at freshmediaworks.com/podcasting.
Welcome back to the 2024 edition of MasterCoaches Wednesday Weekly Buzz. I'm Bob Bertucci, joined by fellow MasterCoaches Mick Haley, Tom Hibert, and Jim Stone. Just a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to ask the other MasterCoaches to come on and talk about themselves real quickly, since it's the new season. I've coached volleyball at 6 different collegiate institutions over the last 45 years. And now I'm happy to say I'm working hard with MasterCoaches Weekly Buzz, which is a news show on volleyball that we come out with every week. And there's different topics and all different topics that we'll take a few minutes to delve into and have some special guests on to talk about the news going on in volleyball world in the U.S. Mick, why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move on from there.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Mick Haley, as Bob said. I went to school at Ball State University. That's how I got into volleyball. Coached 14 years at Kellogg Community College, 17 years at the University of Texas, 4 years with the U.S. national team and Sydney Olympics, and 17 years at USC. That pretty much is a lifetime.
Tom?
Well, my name's Tom Hibert. I have had 3 jobs over 39 years of coaching. I was at the University of Oklahoma as an assistant. I coached at the University of Idaho for 8 years. And then I spent the last 26 years at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I consider to be one of the best volleyball communities in the United States. So, and I'm proud that I coached 39 years and never got fired.
Jim?
Jim Stone, and I was formerly a Ball State player after Mick. Mick was the trailblazer in that regard. Got to play for Coach Don Shondell, and spent 27 years at Ohio State University as the head women's coach. And then after that, I was 10 years coaching with USA Volleyball on their under 18 national team. And along with Tom Hibert and Cindy Fredericks and Terry Pettit, hanging out here in Fort Collins, Colorado, and kind of new to the MasterCoaches, so I'm looking forward to it.
Are you guys recruiting for people to
go to Fort Collins? I think so.
I'm telling you, we could have our own show here. There's about 7 of us living here.
Well, before we start the show, I'd like to take a moment just to remind everybody that Pro Volleyball Federation will be starting or serving up their inaugural season next Wednesday, January 24th, with the Atlanta Vibe versus Omaha Supernovas. And that's going to be in Omaha, Nebraska, at the Chi Health Center at 8 p.m. So anybody in that area, you got to go out and take in this game. This is going to be historical. Now, our topic for today is what's the buzz with men's and boys volleyball? So I'm going to turn it over to Mick Haley and ask Mick to introduce our guest today. And Mick, go ahead and do that, and he'll give us the buzz.
Well, thanks, Bob. I'm really excited to introduce Wade Garard. He is the CEO of First Point Volleyball Foundation. He's a co-founder with John Speraw, our national team coach, and presently the UCLA coach also. And the mission has always been to be the steward of boys and men's volleyball and to grow the game at all levels in all communities. The goal was to contribute funding to initiatives at levels such as USA men's national team, to the collegiate expansion, to supporting high school sanctioning, to growing the sport in underserved areas, and probably just about anything else anybody could think of. This is the start of the 9th year for the foundation. They have done wonderful things. I'm sure we're going to get to all of those things. But I'm going to start right out by throwing this to Wade. Last weekend, we both got a chance to be in Chicago. Wade, tell us what that event was all about and why is First Point involved in several of these events coming up.
Yes, thanks, Mick, and thanks to the Master Coaches for having me on. Happy to give some background about First Point and some of the activities we're doing around the country. In Chicago last weekend, we had a clinic during the Boys Winter Volleyball Championships, boys tournament in Chicago at McCormick Place. And prior to the start of that tournament, we had a clinic with 123 boys. Amazingly got there before the cold or through the predicted weather. And it was dynamic. Mick, as one of our First Point board members, thank you for donating your time to facilitate that clinic, as well as leading the 4 collegiate teams that were in Chicago. UCLA and BYU were both in town to play Loyola and Lewis. And so fantastic that Friday night they donated their time as well, so that the clinicians and the athletes, the coaches and the athletes were the clinicians for that. But it was great to have these boys have the opportunity to see the collegiate players and to learn from them, and then to go the very next night and watch them play it at Loyola. Especially a lot of them were at that Loyola UCLA match. So pretty dynamic when you can bring the boys together with the collegiate athletes. And that was, I think, the 3rd year that we've partnered with that particular boys tournament. And Niles and N3T and that whole team for the Boys Winter Championships, which certainly meant that each year they've made a contribution at the end of that tournament to First Point Volleyball Foundation to grow the game. But it was cold.
That's great. What I'd like you to do, and I know First Point has had an impact in the state of Colorado because we now have a pretty flourishing boys high school program here. Can you talk about the history of First Point, how it started, and all of the tentacles that you have in terms of developing the men's game?
Sure. I'll just start with a personal background. My volleyball career ended in 8th grade in Michigan because they did not have high school boys volleyball in Michigan. So I was left to play tennis and basketball in high school. And then flash forward 3 decades, have been able to combine this career in philanthropy and entrepreneurship that I've experienced as a professional person with being a passionate volleyball fan and a volleyball nerd and a volleyball dad, as my daughter played. And I've known John Speraw for 22 years, something like that. And we've been friends a long time. And in 2016, I was at a girls' tournament with my daughter Mamie, and it was so massive, and I was surprised there were only 21 NCAA Division I programs at the time, and only 23 states, to your point about Colorado sanctioning, only 23 states at the time had sanctioned high school boys volleyball. And I just asked Speraw, I'm like, why isn't this bigger? Because college men's lacrosse has grown, college men's soccer has grown. It's not just Title IX. Why can't this be bigger? And he made a call to Doug Beal. I was hired in 2016 by USA Volleyball to do a strategic plan, a study on how to grow the boys and men's side. And ultimately, the conclusion there was to focus on collegiate growth and providing and finding more opportunities, roster spots and scholarship opportunities at the collegiate level. And if there were more places to play at the next level for boys, then the pace would accelerate. We've seen that in collegiate women's beach, where it pretty quickly got to 70, 80 NCAA Division I programs, and then the pace of youth beach volleyball accelerated. And so we've seen that same thing in the now 8 years since we started First Point Volleyball Foundation. But it started with a study that Doug Beal commissioned, and we decided to do something about it. And we've founded the foundation under the premise that we could use advocacy and philanthropy to provide more opportunities for boys to mature and develop through the sport of volleyball. And that's our mission to this day. So, but it all started with that conversation where I called John and said, why can't this be bigger? And he said, I'm sick of not competing for it. Let's do something about it. So our 3 strategic objectives, and we can talk about some of them today because the landscape changes fast, is collegiate, like as I mentioned, more roster spots and scholarship opportunities for college programs, high school boys opportunities, and then underrepresented communities. Diversity and inclusion. Could we insist and develop ways for more boys of color to play volleyball?
Wade, First Point has been heavily involved in the development and promotion of men's volleyball over the years. And I know you supported Jerry Manicata, with his initiative on Division III men's volleyball. What has First Point been doing with Division I and Division II programs, and which men's teams might be added?
Yeah, so I do spend a lot of time with athletics directors and conference commissioners, and we've had a really dynamic and entrepreneurial board, a very generous board. We have 25 volunteer board members that over the last 8 years themselves as a board have given $2.5 million. So what we have found is that if we can show up to an administrator, and an AD has a very difficult job, and ask them to explore at least the possibility of adding one day the fastest growing team sport in America for boys volleyball, and by far the fastest growing NCAA men's collegiate sport over the last 6 years and over the last 10 years, by far, and I can talk about those numbers. It's even more difficult when you don't have any money, when you're asking them to explore an emerging sport. So yes, we've shown up. We've gotten in front of 8 administrators. The most recent announcements have been 2 Division I programs at Northern Kentucky University, which we had a press conference there a month ago, as well as University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which will be the first Division I HBCU to sponsor men's volleyball. So meaningful to have 2 more D1 announcements, and I think those are both noteworthy because they're public universities as well. The 4 previous Division I announcements that have all happened since we started First Point in 2017 have all been more private, enrollment-driven institutions. And so that's certainly what Jerry Manicata and a group of both USA Volleyball and other regions and other volunteers that were pushing for a good decade to expand Division III, is that you can grow enrollment through this sport. And that's proven to be a huge motivator for a lot of the NAIA, D2, D1. But we've seen growth at every single level. I'll just real quickly go through it. At NAIA, there were 36 men's NAIA programs, and we did 4 press conferences in 2 months back in 2018. And that put them over the 40 threshold. And once you were at a championship sport level in NAIA, it's now up to 68. NAIA men's volleyball programs. In Division I, Division II, Bob, to specifically answer your question, when we started, we were at 42 Division I and Division II men's volleyball programs, and today we're at 65 announced D1, D2 programs. So that's 44% growth of Division I, Division II men's volleyball. And I take that back. It's 44% growth of NCAA men's volleyball in the last 6 years. But 42% of that growth has been Division I, Division II. First Point has started 20 of those. So grants to D1, D2 men's volleyball programs, has definitely moved the meter. So interestingly, I got a call from a MAC AD after the press conference with Northern Kentucky. I never would have thought a public mid-major would be in play. I wouldn't predict whether they will or not. There's some schools that I thought might add men's volleyball with our grant money that never have. It's a lot of moving factors in Division I athletics currently. We also got a call from a Horizon League school that is where Northern Kentucky plays women's volleyball. So the price point is significant for Power 4 D1 programs, and we've heard from $14 million to we had a $4.5 million proposal where we thought we had a donor interested in a Power 5 school, and just too many moving parts at the moment, I think, for that to be realistic. I think until they figure out the employee issue, the revenue share models with football, basketball, probably not going to get the attention of Division I programs at the Power 5 level. But I believe the enrollment cliff and the amount of students at schools, even if you're a large public university now, you've got to do something different to increase your exposure. And with signaling that you are offering a wide variety of activities, including boys and men's volleyball, the most popular growing sport there is, you're increasing the likelihood for application exposure for West Coast applicants and Midwest and international. And so, it's probably why Marquette added men's lacrosse, for example. Their strategic plan called for East Coast enrollment. And that was a strategy. Let's think about adding a sport like lacrosse. So I think we're going to do well with more institutions like Northern Kentucky in the short term. One last thing, and then we can move on to another question, but I think it's worth mentioning. My hope is with SC and UCLA coming into the Big Ten, that we now have 4. And when you've got 4, there's a possibility then to add 2 more or even add associate members to form a conference of 6. And so we currently have 6 AQs, 6 automatic bids, 6 conferences that pull into our 18 national championship, and 2 at-large bids. But there's a number of sports now that beach volleyball, women's water polo, women's ice hockey has always had this in the Big Ten, where they don't have 6 yet, but now they have 4 in those sports. And so we think, and we've had a meeting with the commissioner, we've had a meeting with administrators of the Big Ten, that they could signal strong support for Olympic sports by just approving and allowing associate membership in Big Ten athletics for those 4 sports: women's water polo, women's beach volleyball, men's volleyball, and women's ice hockey. Doesn't mean other Big Ten schools have to add those sports, but then we could take a Stanford or a BYU or Loyola, and we could put together a conference of 6, 7 teams that would be sponsored by the Big Ten. So we're pushing that as we speak. But historically, the Big Ten presidents have not been overly ready to approve that for women's ice hockey, for example. Women's ice hockey has continued to push that over the years. Hey, let's have this associate membership approval, and then we can sponsor the sport. I think maybe we have a shot now that there's a number of sports that are affected by the PAC schools coming in, that with those 4 schools coming in, that maybe we can have them sponsor the sport. So we're hopeful.
Wade, there's always been a cost to go to college by parents and athletes, and that's been one of the biggest things. I started at junior college in Kellogg Community College. Actually, Jim Stone did also. His father was my athletic director, and we started a boys program there. It grew into a national championship program. What's First Point doing with junior colleges, if anything, and is that helpful? Because going to a junior college basically is somewhere around $5,000 a year and not $60,000 or $70,000. And if volleyball were available at the junior colleges for boys, wouldn't that be a great stepping stone to the 4-year schools?
Yes, for sure. And I think when we started First Point, there was 0 2-year schools, 0 junior college men's volleyball programs outside of California. So outside of the 18, now 19 junior college opportunities for men in California, there was not that opportunity elsewhere. So we formed a partnership with the NJCAA and the NJCAA Foundation. And the National Junior College leadership there is, I think, an impressive group. And with that partnership, we awarded a grant for $200,000 to encourage NJCAA to go out and offer at $10,000 per school to your institutions to consider adding the sport. And I'm pleased to report that as of right now, there's 16 that have taken advantage of that opportunity. So there are new programs available for boys currently. And still, I think 3 schools can take advantage of that grant opportunity with funds still remaining at the NJCAA to add the sport. There's different regions of the junior college realm, so finding 6 to go at a time or 4 to go at a time so you have someone against to play, is part of it. But our board has been, as I said before, very generous. Historically, we've raised, since we started First Point, $5.5 million in charitable giving to support. A lot of that has come from a few different lead donors that are on our board. It is worth mentioning that the AVCA originally gave First Point, back to your question about our history, $150,000 to start First Point, kind of seeded us in many ways. And if you look at AVCA and JVA, they're both now 6 years of consecutive giving of supporting, upwards of $250,000 each. So those organizations really were key. And then USA Volleyball stepped up for $400,000 of the $1 million we gave to the SIAC to start the 6 HBCU programs. And then again, also with some of the funding for the Maryland Eastern Shore and the Northern Kentucky grants that we just offered. So, but I mentioned that the donors, because we were coming out of COVID, Mick, and we were still raising money to fulfill the grants we had already committed to. And a couple of our board members were like, gosh, let's not get too far out in front of our skis. We're teeing up opportunities in one hand, raising it real fast with the other. It's dynamic, but maybe we should hold off on any more grants until we have some more capital, right? And someone piped at the board meeting and said, coming out of COVID, when boys want to stay closer to home, where it's the least expensive place to play collegiate men's volleyball would be a community college, a 2-year school. This is exactly what we should be doing coming out of COVID. And 3 people kind of chipped in, and we had all of a sudden 85,000 committed from the board, and then we went out and raised the rest. So I think that type of story illustrates the culture of First Point Volleyball Foundation, firstpointvolleyball.com, where people who really care about providing more opportunities for boys to mature and develop through the sport can get involved with this effort and its philanthropy and our advocacy. So 2-year schools has been a priority, but I think it's one of the better stories for illustrating our culture, which is based around philanthropy and advocacy.
Hey, Wade, this is Jim. And first of all, congrats on everything you've been able to do in the past few years. And boy, much appreciated. So kudos to you and your group for the accomplishments that you've had so far. If we could take a second and veer away from the collegiate world, and as Tom mentioned earlier, Colorado incorporated boys volleyball. I think we're on our 3rd year now, and it seemingly it's growing in a very fast fashion. I was in Ohio a couple of years ago when they added it. So I guess what role does First Point have in the various state associations who might be considering volleyball? And if there were a coach in, Mississippi that wants to get the wheels turning in this regard, what advice would you have, or what role might First Point have in that effort?
Sure. Great question. And I'll speak to Colorado and Ohio in a minute. But first off, you got to work at it. And there are committees now. I'm pleased to report that there's a First Point high school boys growth committee now operating in all 50 states. And a lot of those people have been working on advocating for boys volleyball, have been coaching, have been pushing the envelope, have been encouraging state federations for decades. So We're not making any of this up. It's really been a convening process. So we have a national high school boys volleyball growth committee, and one of our board members, Kenny Rogers, runs every other month a national call, and all the states people call in. These volunteers from all these different states are calling in and they're reporting on what they're doing. This is what we've done in this state. This is what we heard from our state federation. This is what the threshold is for sponsorship or sanctioning in here. And so I think it's been appreciated that these volunteers aren't on an island anymore. Someone is sharing information. Someone is reporting national trends to them. Someone is providing them information. Someone is cheering them on. And they're actually now somewhat competitive with each other, where you've got states like Minnesota and what that committee in particular has done to inspire others to relatively fast growth. I mean, we saw in South Carolina like 43 high schools start boys programs in 2 years, and it was at 0 prior to that. So what happened in Chasta's case in Colorado is that there was not a formal process for how a state high school federation would pilot an emerging sport. And so Scott Siegfried, one of our board members at the time at First Point, also happened to be superintendent of schools of Cherry Creek Public Schools. So we had a real leader, but he developed and drafted a bylaw and presented it to Chasta, saying there should at least be a process for how we would pilot an emerging sport. And girls wrestling at the same time presented that. And the Chasta adopted a process. There had not been a state which had sanctioned high school boys volleyball in like 15 years prior to that. And that same bylaw now has been used in 7 different states by these committee members that have shared that information back and forth. So, and it's somewhat arbitrary. My advice to a volunteer in Mississippi or somewhere would be, don't assume that the first response that the federation has on what is required for sanctioning is gospel. Because in Indiana, for example, for many years we were told with 43 high schools playing boys volleyball, it had been that number for quite a long time. You need to be at 100 or 120 even at one point, they said, before we'll consider sanctioning. Ohio also had a threshold number that they lowered. Utah, they said you have to have 20%, I think it was 30% actually, 30% of high schools sponsoring the sport before we will sanction the sport. And lo and behold, a committee in Utah petitioned that, got it lowered to 20%, dropped the threshold. Now it's sanctioned. And once it's sanctioned, it grows dramatically. In Indiana, after IHSAA said we will pilot this as an official emerging sport, meaning we'll run it with a 2-year glide path towards sanctioning, we've gone from 43 to over 100 high schools in 1 year, as soon as IHSAA said it was official. So the sanctioning efforts run by Kenny and our board members and these volunteers in different states has made a huge impact. 11 states have sanctioned since Colorado. So we're now pushing like 35. And some of those sanctioned with 20 schools sponsoring. And others went through a painstaking process with some highs and lows to get the votes through. But it just shows where advocacy comes in with our mission at First Point Volleyball. Philanthropy and advocacy is going to provide more opportunities for boys. That's what we're doing.
Wade, you talk about the grant system in the grassroots level, and can they get financial assistance in either high schools or club teams, or are those grants specifically to college teams?
You know, a lot of our donors have designated where they want their gifts to go, and often that is to colleges. We did partner with the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation in Buffalo and the Buffalo Community Foundation to do 16 clinics at inner city middle schools, where we brought some money. Ralph C. Wilson Foundation brought some money. So some of those clinic opportunities, I think, are chances for us to partner with local nonprofits or with volleyball associations. Any person who has taken an opportunity to fill out a grant request, by email, it's not a real painstaking process. Our grant committee on the First Point board has reviewed them. We haven't approved all grants. The high schools, there are a number of nonprofits in the volleyball space that are making grants. I know, for example, RMR did, Rocky Mountain Region at one point, was contributing $500 for every high school that added or restarted a team. And at one point, First Point was matching those. So those sorts of things. We've had a donor make a contribution this month to a high school in Maui that we're supporting, that has been affected by the wildfires. So stuff like that. We're open to grant requests. So Wade at firstpointvolleyball.com or Kenny at firstpointvolleyball.com for anyone that would like to seek support for an initiative. Right now, there's some appetite for starting younger ages. So we are looking at a strategy that really thinks about 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old. It's the most painful thing I hear from families. Oh my gosh, my son's having a blast, or I am loving playing volleyball, but I didn't start till I was 17. So I think we need to reach boys in middle school and in younger age groups. So those are a priority. We're looking for grant opportunities, and our donors are interested in younger and younger youth opportunities and not just the collegiate space now. So open for business, I guess, would be the summary.
Excellent.
So Wade, what has the foundation done to develop inner city volleyball for boys? You mentioned that early on in the program. I wonder if you could expand that a little bit.
Well, GIVA, the Garden Empire region of USA Volleyball, has been generous for a couple years. And with that, we made a couple grants to nonprofits, Legacy Volleyball Club, one in particular in New York City, I think doing some interesting work in New York. There's a number of partners that I admire the work they're doing in cities. But it was because of that, I think, GIVA partnership that I started going to school on New York City. So here we have the largest city in America. And if you look at PSAL, the Public School Athletics League, New York City Public Schools, we just had Erica Morrow, the director of volleyball for PSAL, at our board meeting in Tampa. We invited her down to come present to us on the situation in New York. And so here's a stat for you. In New York City, we have 107 high schools, so roughly 1,700 boys that are playing high school boys volleyball. And somewhere, I'm told, 1,100 of those boys of color. So we're certainly wanting to build a bridge between the existing high school boys teams in New York City and these HBCUs that we've helped start. But the striking statistic is out of 107 high schools with varsity boys volleyball teams in New York, 0 of them have JV or freshman teams. And it used to be that they would get, 10, 12 boys trying out for these teams, one team per high school. And 40% of high schools in Manhattan don't even have facilities to play volleyball. So it's never been a huge demand. Well, now they're getting 50, 60 boys coming to tryouts. And, they're athletes playing in parks, this sport. We've reached a turning point in a lot of cities. But I'll tell you, with 107 high schools and no JV or freshman offerings, you really have to be 17 or 18 to make these teams now. So, and a lot of them cannot afford club volleyball. And it's not just on the boys' side. In New York City, for example, there's 233 high school teams. Let's take that back. 233 varsity, and only 45 of those have JV on the girls' side. So what we have is this unbelievable opportunity where I think we need to bring attention to cities. The same thing exists in Philadelphia. And so we are excited about that partnership. In New York City, I know they just had 20% budget cuts at PSAL. And I'm pleased to report that 50 teams requested sports sponsorship from PSAL this year. Half of those girls teams, half of those boys teams. So we've got 107 high schools in New York, and 28 of them or so want to play this year. So, but with budget cuts, it's hard for PSAL to do that. So those are some of the things that we're working on in New York. But ultimately, we have found if we can convene passionate volunteers, provide them with information and support that they need, there's some great champions and advocates out there that are insisting on opportunities for their sons and boyfriends and others. So it's great.
Hey, Wade, I have a question. Going away from high school, more back into the collegiate world. First Point's not going to underwrite an entire program. So what are the fundraising duties in broad terms that if a program were to accept a grant or support from First Point, what then? What do they, either they or the athletic department, what are the financial responsibilities that come into play at that point?
Well, ABCA has done a lot of surveys. We have budget data for each collegiate program in each division and how much it costs to run a volleyball program. Most of those are underfunded. You all have experienced this where you've had to go out and raise money to fill gaps in your budgets. I would like to see less sharing of coaches, where you see some NAI D2 programs that first start where the men's coach is also the women's coach. So I'd like to see the salaries increase. We've written into some grants, some expectation for that. We have often been essential for a president or an AD to realize, okay, we can have some of the costs covered for a coach to be employed for a year and recruit so we can start this program with momentum well, as opposed to just starting it like with the club team, for example. And so before tuitions can be attributed to the program, our grants can be helpful in at least covering some of those startup costs. When I say that there's of the 41 men's collegiate volleyball programs that First Point has started in these 8 years, they're now funding 85 scholarships that did not exist. Our dollars haven't funded those scholarships. Our dollars have been given to the institution for them to start it. And then we usually require a minimum amount of scholarships that they commit to funding. So if the maximum for D1, D2 is 4.5, then a lot of times if it's depending on the school, they can have a roster of 18, 20, 22 men, and the college is making money with only 4.5 scholarships. But we've required some of those sorts of things. We've also done a lot of coaches on how to raise money. So we make it a point to insist that there's some learning about how to fish, and whether coaches like it or not, it's part of your job description, even if it's not part of your job description. If the administrator says, oh, just win and recruit, you don't worry about raising money, baloney. Those who are bringing prospects, donors, generosity, leads even for the entire athletic department are more relevant than the coaches that are not raising money. So we say in each grant agreement two things. You become our partners in growing the game in your area, because their venue can be a venue for clinics, etc. And then also we're your partner long term. It might be 3 years that we make a more of a larger grant, but we encourage these existing programs to ask us to come to their annual gala each year because we want them to keep raising money. I will say we also spent some time after the pandemic encouraging existing programs to raise dollars. So if you just look at those programs that were in Chicago last weekend or the programs in Austin this coming weekend at the First Point Collegiate Challenge, we've got 6 of the top 15 programs coming with UCLA and SC and Ohio State and Penn State and Ball State and Stanford, all going to be in Austin, Texas this weekend. All of those programs are in some form of an endowment campaign and an operating fundraising campaign. So I was on 7 conference calls over 9 months with the Stanford Men's Volleyball Committee, for example, when it was announced that Stanford Men's Volleyball was one of the 11 sports slated to be cut by Stanford. And what's interesting is of the 25 sports that Stanford at the time proposed keeping, 24 of those 25 had a named head coach endowment. And of the 11 sports that Stanford had proposed cutting, 10 of those 11 did not have a named head coach endowment. And so helping that Stanford Men's Volleyball Committee, even though none of the money came through First Point, but being involved with existing programs, encouraging PAV and Speraw, and I think Dan Friend's endowment for Lewis Men's Volleyball is up to $700,000. Speraw's raised just under $400,000 this current school year. So I think we cannot assume that our flagship programs in men's volleyball are all safe. especially if this Project D1 and Charlie Baker and some of the aspects that I think are good that the NCAA is trying to get out in front of now with NIL and other activities, it does mean the revenue share is coming. It does mean the pie is going to be potentially smaller for men's Olympic sports, maybe women's volleyball as well. Coaches have to raise money. So we call it playing offense, playing defense. We're playing some defense, making certain existing programs are healthy, and that the coaches are bringing in steering committee members to go after large-scale endowment giving.
Yeah, I was going to ask the question about, you answered it earlier in this broadcast about the Big Ten, but what I was wondering is there a possible scenario where SC and UCLA moving to the Big Ten actually hurts the possibility of volleyball growth and might cause them to drop?
I do think that there are scenarios where a program goes, we don't have a logical place to play, and now I have to find a new coach. Maybe I don't want to continue with this sport. So I worry about some programs right now. I think there's some growth expected at the MPSF. I think the EIVA is in a growth mindset, the East Coast League. I believe the NEC will get an AQ next year, so the NEC could be the next Division I multi-sport conference to sponsor the sport. This will be their second year of the NEC. You have two NEC schools that just left the NEC, the MAC schools, and I believe with like colleges like Ryder and Manhattan who might be interested. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the MAC sponsors the sport. But there will be growing pains. If Ohio State leaves the MIVA, then what? If the GLVC, the D2 league that some of the MIVA schools are in, sponsors the sport, there will be growing pains. I worry about a D2 national championship. Fantastic sign of growth. But what does that mean for D1? So we have to prioritize some Division I growth because we're seeing that turning point has been hit in D2, where they're adding without our money. The growth has become organic. And so I believe there's more and more Division I schools that will be enrollment driven, that will want to explore volleyball. But I'm worried about some of the larger ones. Unless you have endowment or unless you're proving where you're bringing in the resources, I think the schools that decide to go for it, by the way, that MAC AD who called me after the never would have thought that school would be in play. I also heard within the same week that their president saying, be nice if we went for the top subdivision of Division I. If there's 30 or 40, can we figure out how to meet the expectations for our football and basketball? And so that one may not be in play. But I believe we'll go from 29 Division I programs to 40 Division I programs. And I believe we'll hit that by 2028. That's our goal. But let's not overstate it. That means there's 288 places that I don't think in the next 5 years will add men's volleyball as a D1. But I think we're about ready to go. Like we just went from 23 to 29. Now we're going to go from 29 to 40 in D1.
Can you be a little bit more specific? I'm sorry, Bob. Can I just?
I wanted to give you some time to ask some cleanup questions, and I think you're going this weekend, right, to the First Point Foundation's clinic and event. So I want to make sure we talk about that a little bit more for anybody that might be interested in showing up there.
Yeah, come hang out with us in Austin. It's going to be a super fun weekend. As I said, we've got 3 collegiate matches on Friday the 19th and 3 collegiate matches on Saturday the 20th. 6 of the top 15 programs in the country are coming. There is a boys tournament, the Southwest Boys Classic, happening in the same convention center. So it's nice to be able to walk off the court and go watch the men collegiate players play. And then once again, just like last weekend, Mick will be the leading head clinician for a clinic on Thursday night where we'll have all 6 head coaches and some of their athletes from each of the 6 collegiate teams. And I suspect if we had 123 in the blizzard snow last Friday, I suspect we could have 200 boys Thursday night at that clinic. So it's going to be dynamic. The First Point Collegiate Challenge. Follow us on social media, FPCC24, and it should be a really dynamic weekend.
Along with this, the college coaches are donating their time to do this, and the college players are donating their time to come in and be on the court with these young boys. This is a 2-hour clinic at most of these places that basically the young athletes get to touch, communicate, get instruction from some of the top collegiate players in the country, and then they get led through demonstrations of drills by some of the top coaches in the world. I mean, how would you like to be on the court last weekend with John Speraw or the BYU coach or the Loyola Chicago coach or Dan Friend down at Lewis? I mean, that was pretty awesome. And then this weekend, you've got 6 more with UCLA and coming down to Austin. So they're making 2 trips to the Midwest, certainly giving back. And they already hosted a tournament to open the season with the HBCUs. So there are a lot of people in the collegiate game giving back. But Wade, the question I wanted to ask you is if you can be a little bit more specific. So you mentioned maybe the D2, they're growing so fast with boys volleyball, they want to have their own championship. What is the fear then for D1 as far as the tournament's concerned? And is that why there's even more emphasis on trying to get more D1 varsity opportunities for boys, simply because it gives more opportunity for a greater tournament and more exposure? Is that in jeopardy if D2 goes to their own national championship?
Well, I think we're 5 or 6 years away from that happening, at minimum, just for the landscape. The thresholds are being lowered by the NCAA in different divisions on the amount of teams required to have a national championship. So I think it will start faster at D2. So I don't think, because we're sort of grandfathered in as the championship sport the way we are with the NCAA and part of that new media deal and the rest, I think we're going to continue to have some runway time to do that. But, I'd much rather have 40 or 50 get over that 40 mark, Division I's or even 50. Men's volleyball's on the rise. There's some other sports that are declining pretty rapidly, and I think we're in a good place, but we can't be complacent. We have to be intentional on encouraging these programs to consider adding the fastest growing team sport in America for boys. I mean, we're talking about 20% growth of high school boys volleyball in the last 6 years. The second fastest grew at 1%, and all the rest were negative. So in every other boys sport, boys are stop playing, and they're coming to volleyball. So I think we have a great opportunity.
Well, guys, Wade has to catch a flight and get ready for this big weekend coming up. So Wade would like to just thank you very much for taking the time to be part of MasterCoaches Wednesday Weekly Buzz. Best of luck this weekend. I know it's going to be a great event. You got Haley there, so how could it not be a great event, right?
Yeah, we'll be hitting the town. Thanks.
Thanks again, and have a great weekend.
Very good. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Wade. Take care.
Thanks.
Well, guys, why don't we transition into Buzz Reaction here and just hear your reactions to the things Wade had to say, about the buzz in men's and boys volleyball.
Well, I liked what he had to say, and I, had not had a whole lot of exposure to First Point Foundation until they made these efforts in Colorado. And, it was special to me. When I grew up, they had boys high school volleyball in the state of Oklahoma. And otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. And it was, that effort by a guy named Jess Cooper, who I think some of you know, that really changed the trajectory of volleyball in the state of Oklahoma, at least for a while. And then they produced a couple of national team players, and it wasn't me, but I just think it's really important. And I hope that the people listening to this understand how these grassroots programs make a huge difference in the sport overall over time.
I still am interested. I mean, he alluded to it a couple times with the conference realignments, plural, how that's going to impact men's volleyball. On one hand, you kind of go, okay, these conferences, the Power Four, whatever moniker they might have, I mean, they're going to have buckets of money, but you just don't know how they're going to spend it. And in the schools that are out, my particular concern is out west with the Mountain West Conference. Is that what it's called with men's? I'm not 100% sure the name.
The MPF. It's the what is it? Mountain Pacific.
Yeah.
MPSF.
Yeah. The schools that are still going to be out there, Long Beach, somebody like that. I mean, what's going to happen with those schools, for example? And is Stanford and they're going to be with the ACC now, and USC and UCLA are now with the Big Ten. There's so much moving parts, and he alluded to that. I just don't know what the future is going to be for men's volleyball. On one hand, it's like the conferences are going to be flush with cash, and maybe it's a good thing. On the other hand, maybe it's a bad thing.
Yeah, it was interesting to me when he made that mention, and I thought for sure he was going to say, well, UCLA and USC are going to stay with that West Coast group, because that makes the most sense to me. It's some of the best competition in the country in men's volleyball. But then he alluded to maybe the Big Ten brings two other teams in and starts their own league. And I'm thinking to myself, that isn't great for the type of competition those guys want week after week.
Well, they've done a lot of work on this, and it's pretty interesting. Here are the scenarios. The Big West, of course, got 6 teams to go volleyball, and they get a member of that conference into the national championship every year, and that's Hawaii and Long Beach and that group. But they normally have 2 or 3 really Irvine that are really good, so they beat each other up competition wise to try to get that spot in the tournament. By having now more spots, 7 or 8 teams going to a national championship, with the hope that the NCAA will prove up to 12. The reason I asked the question for him to be more specific was, if we are asking the committee to go up and yet the conferences are spreading out with only 5 or 6, the HBCUs, for instance, they get an automatic berth now. The East Coast Conference gets an automatic berth. The NEC just added a team, lost Sacred Heart, right, Bob? But added a team. Conferences. They'll keep their automatic coming now. That's 3. You got the MIVA is 4. You got the MPCF is 5, and the Big West, maybe I mentioned them twice. So you've got at least 5 automatics. So you really want at least 8 teams in the tournament, and hopefully up to 12, where you'd have 5 automatics and 7 at-larges. But the fear is that if the 2-year, the Division II were to go quickly,
that's a bigger issue,
but in 2 or 3 years, if they were to leave, that would diminish those conferences to maybe only 3 conferences having a total of 6 Division I schools in them, and that would cause them to go back to 4 or 5 teams into the national championship, and that wouldn't be good for men's volleyball. And that's the fear. In the Big Ten, the deal with the Big Ten, you say, well, it'd be great now if the Big Ten adds. But if they add, they lose the primary school in the East Coast Conference. They would lose Penn State. they would lose the primary school in the MIBA, which would be Ohio State. I hadn't heard Chicago Loyola being considered, but Wade said that when we were talking. You lose BYU and Stanford from the MPFC, or what? I'm sorry, I don't know the initials properly, PFFC. But anyway.
We just had a little problem with Mick's internet, I think. But I think his point was the Mountain Pacific Conference could deteriorate if they went to a Big Ten conference. And
right.
But I think the bigger issue is whether that Division II moves out, and I don't see that happening in the near future. I think we're okay there.
Yeah.
Would it be beneficial to them to have their own championship in Division II, or do the D2 schools of like playing up?
Well, I think the D2 schools do like playing up just because it gives them some local competition against Division I teams, and it also gives them the competition that they want. I think when their numbers start getting greater, all right, and hopefully at the same time your Division I teams will start to get greater, which I think that's Wade's hope, and he's seeing some movement in that direction. Then the move, of these teams going to the Big Ten, for example, would be fine. It'll work itself out, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We'll add this to the list of questions about college sports now.
That's right.
Yeah, well, that's right, Jim. That's the bigger issue, is just college sports in general, and that could have a trickle down effect on all our sports, other than football and basketball. So that getting worked out is really the bigger issue.
Yeah.
Well, before we close up for today, we did talk about, next Wednesday for the Pro Volleyball Federation, but also next Thursday, January 25th, the Columbus Fury is going to be playing Grand Rapids Rise at the Van Andel Arena at 7 p.m. And Jim, you'll like this. All right, our girlfriend Kathy George, all right, who worked with the World University Games with us, has $2 beers, $2 hot dogs, and inaugural season T-shirts as a giveaway promotion at her game. And then we finish out that week with Friday night at 7:00. The Atlanta Vibe is playing the Orlando Valkyries. All right, and that'll be down at Addition Financial Arena, again at 7 p.m. So this is a pretty exciting week coming up for the, pro volleyball, the Real Pro Volleyball Federation, and getting them kicking off their season. Anything else you guys want to talk about before we sign off? We got about 2 minutes here, Mick.
I think this the PVF schedule is really interesting because you have people who are playing each other, right? Like they'll play somebody at Omaha, and then Omaha comes back to Vegas like the next week. It's really interesting how they set it up. And then Vegas doesn't start for the first 3 weeks. They don't have a match.
Well, I think that might be because Vegas was probably the last franchise to actually get started. Is that right, Mick? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think they were the last to come on and play commit to playing for this year. I just attended one of the practices for one of the teams, and the intensity is pretty interesting. There are a lot of kids in the gym, a lot of young women playing, and the competition's pretty high. It's not like a collegiate practice where you can pick out the starting six right away. There are 10, 11, 12, 13 quality athletes, 3 or 4 liberos, 3 setters, 4 or 5 outside hitters. It's pretty interesting to watch the practices, and the coaches coaches are being forced to really think like NFL coaches or Major League Baseball coaches, not having people standing around, everybody getting instruction at every point of the practice, really, really good focuses. So I think you'll be shocked if you go to some of the pro practices. They're not going to be like college practices. They're going to be pretty intense and pretty focused, and you'll find the players are pretty serious because, they know that they could be out of a job at any time. There's a league that's going to quit playing pretty soon, and there's going to be a rush of players available in the middle of March. What if the league can get somebody to improve their position and get into first place, one of the teams? Somebody's going to go. We haven't had that in volleyball, even with the portal, because they can't go until the end of the year.
Right.
Or the end of the semester. So, it's going to be interesting to watch. First time through, I think, is going to be pretty exciting. I think Tom's right. The scheduling is going to be different. It's going to be made for TV and made for spectatorism, and the players are just going to have to adjust, and the teams are going to have to adjust, and it's going to be pretty exciting, and it'll be interesting to see who comes out and starts scoring points. It's just like basketball. Who's gonna be the scoring leaders there, and who's going to carry the team?
And Mick, you know more about this than I do. But I was wondering, because this goes well into the month of May, which is, there are some European players or kids playing in Europe who will be done before that. Can they add those players to their rosters?
They can add them up until the start of the playoffs, I think, which I believe are the first week of May. I think they're done the first week of May, but there is a rub. For instance, I have heard that our national team coach wants the players in the 1st of May, and the league is not finished until the 7th or 8th of May. Mm-hmm. I think that's true in several other leagues, Italian league and maybe a league in Turkey. So I'm not sure where the FIVB comes in to say whether they have to go with their national team if the national team calls them. This happens in soccer right now. We'll be going through the soccer season, and all at once there's a 2-week period where they take your players and go play in a tournament somewhere with your national team, and then you get them back. That would drive me nuts as a coach. Try to figure that one out.
Yeah, but in soccer, they in most situations they stop playing. They take a 2-week hiatus to go for whatever European championship or something like that. But I'm sure the volleyball is not going to stop playing.
No, and actually, I don't think they stopped playing in the U.S. Soccer League this year, did they?
Oh, they did, I think, Mick.
I was thinking more about the European League. Break.
Yeah. So there's some really interesting things. And what did I hear that it wasn't wasn't ice hockey? Somebody wasn't gonna stop. Maybe it's baseball. Baseball's not going to stop for the Olympics. Since they added baseball back into the Olympics, I don't think baseball is going to stop and let the players go and play in the Olympics. I think that's what I heard.
Well, who was the baseball player that got his knee? He blew out his knee in that international competition they had before the season last year, and some of the people on that in the Major League Baseball are saying no more. We can't lose our best players.
Was that the guy that jumped on home plate celebrating?
He was celebrating, yeah, and tore his ACL.
Yeah, he should get kicked out.
Well, that's sad that happened. All right, well, listen, guys, we better wrap it up for today. I know we definitely have a show talking about training for the pro volleyball as compared to collegiate volleyball. I think that's going to be a show in the future that will and how the coaching might be different. We are going to have an NIL show coming up in a couple of weeks. So people that are listening or viewing, make sure you're back next Wednesday. We'll keep you on your toes.
Thanks, Bob.